The Torah reading for us outside of the land of Israel is Parshat Shelach, and the title of this class is Know When to Hold 'Em, Know When to Fold 'Em. And the explanation, hopefully, of the title will be apparent by the end of the class. That's never a certainty with me, but hopefully that'll be the case. We're going to begin at the end of the Parsha, and it's page 816 for those following along in a stone chumash. And it's the Parsha which is called the Parsha of Tzizit, something that we say every day. It's included when we daven in the Parsha of Tzizit. And it says very famously that a reason what we're supposed to concentrate on when we put on our tzitzis and when we wear them, and it's a mitzvah for men specifically, and women generally don't wear tzitzit, although they're certainly not prohibited from doing so. It says, "V'lo tatur acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem," that a person should not stray after. That's usually the translation. And the word latur really means to tour. T-O-U-R in English is based on the Hebrew word taf vav resh. To tour, to go for a walk, to go for, as they say in Yiddish, a spazier, to look around and see what's going on around you. So the Torah is telling us that we are, in wearing tzitzit, we're focusing ourselves in such a way that we are not just walking through life with our eyes wide open and taking in the sights, so to speak, but rather we have a direction in life. And we have a purpose in life which shapes where we go. Okay, and we know that the Torah, the first thing told to Abraham was, Lechacha, you should go. In other words, I have a place for you to go. I have a journey for you to take. And we know over and over again, Hitalachta, we're supposed to walk in God's ways. So when we walk around enveloped in a certain milieu which the tzitzit represents. Now we think of wearing tzitzit under our clothing, which we do. We also wrap a talit when we pray on the outside. And the idea of being enveloped, literally embraced by Judaism as we go through life. And what does Rashi say to this? Because otherwise, Halei v'hoinayim heim meraglim laguf. It says, otherwise, your heart and your eyes become spies, which of course is the beginning of this week's Torah reading, which we'll read about, specifically for your body, for your physical existence. And that's clearly something that we're trained in. You know, an infant looks out in the world. I'm hungry. I'm cold. I have needs. How do I fulfill those needs? Where do I fulfill those needs? Those are the eyes that open up onto the universe once we're created. And those eyes have a purpose for us to survive and to flourish. But ultimately, the Torah's concept is that those eyes should become enveloped in a perspective on life. And if you look in the book Horev by Samson Raphael Hirsch, it was really the first book he ever wrote, not the first book he ever published. But he does something very magnificent. It's a book that's not easy to read, but that I recommend wholeheartedly. As a young man, newly inducted as the rabbi of a community, he wrote this tremendously encompassing book where he lays out all the mitzvot of Judaism. And surprisingly, not surprisingly, number 4 in his list in order of importance from this week's Torah reading. And what does he say? He says, and he's quoting a Gemara there, it's a Talmudic quote from Bracho 12, it's either A or B, I'm sorry, I'm not sure. But the Torah is warning us that there's such a thing as an eye that sees purely by rational understanding. And Hirsch doesn't say this, but I always relate that to the Greeks. What you see is what you get. Form defines essence, all these ideas. And the way Hirsch conceives of it, in a way, it's a perspective on scientific inquiry on a certain level, is that you can come to see the physical world around you as a complete self-contained entity with no ultimate purpose, with no creator. And this, of course, is the Greek Roman tradition. The world always was. There is no creator. The world, we don't subscribe to that viewpoint scientifically or religiously anymore, but they did. That was their way of taking God out of the picture, so to speak. So there's this eye of rational understanding where if anything happens in the world, good, bad, and different, I need to explore it, understand it, parse it, and come up with a theory and an explanation that suits me. And I would underline the word suits me, because after all, it's my physical eye looking at the physical world. And then there's the second eye that a person possesses, and that's our physical eye. As Hirsch defines it, you have an eye which leads you to wrong notions about creation and wrong notions about God, such as the idea that God is an absentee God, even if you want to start with God. And then the second issue is that you become a beast of indulgence, where your eye is simply exploring the world. What will give me pleasure, the most immediate pleasure? I want to gratify myself. I have a very short-term attention span. I have a short-term memory. I'm hungry. I respond to the world around me with this sense of urgency, with a sense of irrationality, but it's drive and driven. So he says those are the concepts that the Torah is out to blunt when it says "V'lo taturu acharei levavchem," and that's why the bet is livavchem instead of libchem, different than we explain in the Shema for another time. But that's what the Torah is addressing here. So the Torah is saying, rather than that, wrap yourself in a perspective of Judaism, which is defined by mitzvot, by purpose, by goal setting, by fulfilling God's intent for the world. And indeed, there are even sources that I just saw today, which indicate that when a person, for the Mitzvah of Tzizit, for those people wearing tzitzis, and I'm really not meaning to exclude the women in the group here, and I will tell you, although don't try this at home, there are very righteous women in Yerushalayim who I'm told do wear tzitzit, which no one knows about, but they do it purely because even though it's a mitzvah, they're not obligated, and it's a mitzvah that they've taken upon themselves for various reasons. But when a person wraps themselves in a talit in the morning, for sure, and you make the blessing litatef, that you're hugged, should be like a hug from God and like a hug from your parent. It stays with you all day long, and it gives you direction. It limits your wanderlust, and that's probably a good word to use here in this regard. And what it rather places within your awareness is a relationship to a living, involved, engaged God, creator of everything. The Torah, in a certain sense, that is its purpose. That's its goal. And it's interesting to note, what I would say, is that when you think about an infant gaining vision and interacting in the world, what infants quickly latch onto is that I have a mother who nurtures me, who seems to always be there, who seems to have no identity of her own other than as my mother, to take care of me and to jump at my every need. And in truth, and that we've talked about this in recent classes, if we can develop that attitude that we have as infants regarding our parents, and we can transpose that onto God being similarly active, involved, engaged, nourishing, interested in what we're doing, then the person has made a very successful transition in terms of becoming director of your vision and of your yearnings and your will and all these other aspects of human nature. And that's the goal of this mitzvah. Okay, so that's the conclusion of this week's Torah reading. And it's very, very pertinent. It's going to be our starting point for going back to the beginning of the Parsha and understanding what happened when the spies were sent out, first and foremost. And second, understanding why after the spies were disastrously sent out, a group of the Jewish people took it upon themselves to have a further disaster and decide to march out to conquer the land of Israel on their own without God's sanction, and add a disaster as a outgrowth of a disaster. So we're going to turn our attention now back to the beginning of the Parsha. But first, there's a backstory here. And there's an important backstory here. And it's in Genesis chapter 15, sentence 17. And I didn't write down the page number here, and I'm not going to look it up in the interest of time. But here's the backstory. The backstory is in the earliest moments of Jewish life. Abraham has a vision of the future of the Jewish people. It's called the Brit Bein HaBetarim, the covenant between the parts that involved animals being torn in half, and Abraham in a vision walking between them and a fire consuming them. It's a very dramatic, hard to fill in all the blanks vision. But in there, God says specifically, and we say this on Pesach time with the Haggadah, you should know that your descendants will be exiled and they will be strangers in a strange land. And then it says, Vidor Revi'i Yashuvu Hena. It will only be the fourth generation that will return back to the land of Israel. Why? Ki lo sholem avon ho'emori ad hena. Interesting explanation that requires our attention in light of what takes place in the events that take place in the beginning of this week's Parsha of Shelach. God says specifically that there's a promised land. He's talking to Abraham at the get-go. You're going to travel to this land. There's all kinds of commentary that Abram was miraculously transported to the land of Israel for this vision, and then he went back to where he was. But leave those aside. Rashi does talk about that. But he's saying, you're going to travel courageously on a path that's not going to be defined by your eyes and ears and nose and interest and self-gratification, but rather it's going to be directed by God with purpose to found a people that is ultimately going to live in this land and is going to uphold all the values that sustain humanity and keep the world going. Okay? That's what the vision is. But it's delayed. It's going to be delayed by 4 generations. Why? Why? Because there's a people already in that land. They're called the Amorites. They weren't the only people. The Canaanim were really in the land. The Amorites were on the border of the land. It's all spelled out in the Torah soon. We're going to fight with them. We're going to take their land away from them. We're going to do all the things that seem to be catching the ire of humanity nowadays in terms of replacing an indigenous population and taking their land. That's what the vision includes. Okay, we may as well be blatant about it. But it's only going to happen once that nation forfeits its right to be in the land. Now, who's going to judge that? Not me, not you, not the United Nations. That's God. Again, we're getting back to this idea that we just talked about with Tzizit. God is engaged, is involved. The same way God parcels out food for each and every person, the same way these people we're talking about lived in the wilderness. And each morning manna fell from heaven, and they ate it, and they were sustained by it. And a cloud of glory shielded them from a boiling sun, and smoothed out their pathway in life, and guided them step by step. God is indicating all that to Abraham right from the get-go. I am running the world, and I'm promising you this land. Your descendants are going to suffer terribly for an interim period. They're going to be strangers in a strange land. They're going to be oppressed. Eventually, they're going to get this land. When are they going to get it? They're going to get it when, in the scales of God's eyes and judgment, the Amorites no longer deserve to be in that land and need to be replaced for the well-being of creation. So look at that message. Look at the intensity of that message. It's not one of victory. It's not one that your descendants are going to be powerful. They're going to be like crusaders. They're going to go marauding through the world. We're at the blade of the sword. We're going to subjugate the world. None of those elements are included in the Jewish people's legacy whatsoever, but rather a sense that you're going to become in tune with the creator of the world's value judgments as to what is right at this moment and what is appropriate. And you're going to live your history in sync with God's will all the way through history, like it or not. That's part of the vision. And it's going to work, and it's going to unfold. And that's the way human history is going to develop. Okay, this is an essential backstory to bring us to the beginning of this week's Torah reading, which in Parshat Shelach, which is chapter 13. We're going to pick up the narrative on sentence 2. It's page 798 in the Stone Chumash, if you're following along. The Jewish people were in the wilderness. The Jewish people approached Moshe. To fill in that narrative, you have to look both in the book of Devarim, where it's accounted for, and accounted here. We're not going to do that tonight. Shlach lecha anoshim v'yaturu et haaretz. Here's that word, yaturu. Send forth people, men, and spy out, investigate, explore. Use your eyes and your ears and your heart to walk around this promised land. Take a look at it, preview of coming attractions, and then you'll be ready to go right to the land, and I will miraculously lead you in battle into the land. And because the time is right, these 4 generations have passed, the generation of Levi, the son of Yaakov, and Kahas, and Amram, and Moshe. Those are your 4 generations. So it is time, God says. And if the backstory is the people insisted on sending out spies. They wanted to have some advanced information about the land. Okay, that's not an unreasonable thing. God says, fine, if that's what you want to do, go for it. So again, where are we up to now? And they leave, by the way, on the 29th of Sivan, which is the Hebrew date this Sunday. Okay, and they spend 40 days exploring the land. And when do they come back? They come back on the 9th of Av. Tragic day in the annals of the Jewish people. Okay, what do they see? Now, again, we've already defined that what you see to a huge extent is governed by where you look, how you look, what your perspective is. So what do they see? And here I'm going to go with an unusual explanation from the Shelach, who's a very Kabbalistic, important thinker, sources that I've seen quoted. They saw Anshe Midot, people of stature. And if you learned Rashi in elementary school or in middle school, you were told they were huge, they were physically big. They were like the Norwegians, because I happened to look up today. They have the greatest average height in the world are the people of Norway. Their average height for a male is over 6 feet tall. And so that's what they saw. They saw people of stature. What does the Shelach say? No. They saw people of refinement, midot, just like we talk about having good midot. What did they see? Now, the Talmud says they saw funerals everywhere they went. The Shelach understands this in a very unusual, interesting way. It says, we know that burying the dead is the greatest kindness that could be done to someone. So they saw a nation that takes very seriously their responsibility to honor one another, and that when someone passes away, they properly bury the person, they care for the mourners, they do everything appropriately. And that's what they saw on Shem Midot. They saw people that seemed to be refined. And then they concluded, and we were grasshoppers in their eyes. I'm sorry, we felt like grasshoppers, and we were grasshoppers in their eyes, which they couldn't possibly have known. But how does the Shelach understand this? And this is very interesting, especially in light of the initial prophecy that Abraham received, which the Jewish people knew by tradition. They saw the land devours its inhabitants. What did that mean according to the Shelach? They saw a land that doesn't tolerate evil people, a land that's demanding. The Torah teaches us that the land of Israel vomits out misbehaving, inappropriate people. For some reason, they don't find a home there. That happened throughout history, in modern history, for the last 2,000 years. No one has felt at home in the land of Israel except for Jewish people. And not even all the Jewish people, because we know we got kicked out of the land twice, because the land itself can't handle people who are not respectful of the moral quality of the land, such as having a sabbatical year every 7 years. That's a requirement. The land demands that. And if the land isn't treated with that respect, it takes its revenge by creating a situation where it lies fallow for decades after decades and even centuries after centuries. They saw people of good character. They saw people who were ready to show kindness to the dead, which is the highest level of kindness, knowing they'd never be repaid. They felt like grasshoppers because they looked at themselves in the mirror and they said, are we really good enough to inherit this land? Now, what I would caution right now is reminding us that wasn't part of what God told Abraham in the original covenant. God didn't say there'll be 4 generations until your descendants will be good enough to inherit the land. But God rather said that although these Amorites appeared with these qualities of morality and refinement to these spies who themselves didn't have a sense of themselves properly, in God's eyes, they had forfeited all right to the land because of their moral behavior, moral misbehavior, because of their idolatry, because of other things that were the hallmarks of their way of life, which the Torah is going to deal with as we go through the next chapters of the Torah, one by one. So what was going on here? So the Ramban says a very direct thing. They missed the point of going out of Egypt. They missed the point of the splitting of the sea. They missed the point of standing at Mount Sinai, where they then mustered the temerity to say, we will fulfill and we will study. They felt as though Hashem is not fully in charge. We can't let ourselves go completely with his program. And therefore, we have to make our rationalizations and we have to make our calculations and our computations. And we have to decide for ourselves whether we're going to go into this land or not, even though God is telling us openly, go. The cloud of glory is leading you there. The pillar of fire at night. The Mishkan, the tent of meeting, is with you. Moshe is at the helm. This is what was promised. This is what Moshe was told at the burning bush. It's a straight path here. But instead, they took this quote unquote rational, calculating eye, which is so subject to one's personal limitations. And they made their calculation and they said, no way are we getting into this land. This is the narrative according to the Shelach Kadosh. And it's backed really by a sentence in Psalms 111, number 6, which Rashi quotes in the first Rashi in the Torah, where it says, Koach Masav Higid Riamo. God calls the shots for his people to give them the portion in the world that they're meant to have. It's a straightforward statement in Psalms. It's straightforward to us that the land of Israel, just like the song Exodus says, it's our land. It's not automatic that we can possess it because that depends on God's agreement. But it's certainly not up to us to decide to abandon it or to lose the nerve to step forward. The lessons of Mitzrayim were very simple and direct, the Ramban says. Could you have gotten out of Egypt on your own? Did you have the strength? Did you have the merit? Did you have the integrity to overcome all those obstacles? No way at all. No way on earth. The same way you experienced all that, you needed to take that vision and that way of seeing the world and needed to apply it to the road ahead of you. And you needed to say, yes, these people appeared very righteous. Yes, these people appeared, the land is a difficult land because it requires moral behavior in order to stay there. And who knows how long we're going to be staying there? Who knows what future history might unfold? And we today know how it unfolded, that even after possessing the land, we were kicked out with the first exile and then the second exile, which continues all the way through today. That's not our business. Our business is to show that we are signed on to the program that God has set up for the world, and we have the temerity to do it. The hour is late, but on page 810, what happens next? Vayashkimu baboker, the next morning after the decree that this entire generation would die in the wilderness, and not one of them would inhabit the land with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, who were the two spies who saw things the way they were meant to be seen. A group says, we're going up. Vayashkimu baboker, again, an echo of Abraham, got up in the morning when he was commanded to offer Isaac. They got up ready for self-sacrifice. We were wrong. We realized our mistake. Let's correct our mistake. And the Seforno, a very gentle explanation on the Torah, characterizes this response as a grave sin, which he says is lachaches. Now, just to understand the terminology, sometimes people sin because they're overwhelmed by passion, desire, personal shortcomings. It's possible for a person to sin purely in defiance of God. Grave way of sinning. Now, if I got up and I had no appetite to eat a prohibited item, and I stood up and said, God, I don't want the food. I don't like the food. I don't desire the food, but I'm eating it purely to show you, God, that you have no hold over me. That's considered a sin lahachas. That's what he said they were doing. How could he be so harsh with them? Especially the Seforno, who time after time so sensitively addresses the issues of the Torah. And here's the way I would like to explain it. Let's look at what courage means. What courage is about, misunderstanding courage, is that I can make things happen in the world, whether God likes it or not. That's a misunderstanding of courage. That's what this group decided. We sinned, we were wrong, we needed to go up to the land. Okay, we're going. God says don't go. God says specifically don't go, you're going to die. I'm ready to die. Because don't you see it doubling down on the very mistake that caused them to despair literally the day before and losing their nerve to conquer the land. They're doubling down on this idea that I have a viewpoint, and that's all that matters. And if I want to rectify what I see as my wrong in the way that I want to rectify it, I'm doing it. And God just step aside from me. And God says, I don't do that. Now, the splitting of the sea happened because a courageous Jew named Nachshon ben Aminonov, the leader of Judah, walked into the water and the water split. Remember, God even told Moshe, what are you praying for? What are you davening for? Take action. He took action. The water split. Different, we need to understand the distinction between the two. He was in league with he was the equivalent of Kalev and Yoshua, saying, God promised us a land. Let's go up and conquer it. With God on our side, miracles happen. Without God on our side, we can have all the odds in our favor, and we are not going to succeed. So this is the big lessons that we take from this week's Torah reading. We start with the tzitzis, in the sense that we say we have mitzvot, positive commandments. And by the way, these are the only three mitzvot that Maimonides' list is coming from this Torah reading, even though other people count many more. The mitzvah is to adopt a moral, godly viewpoint to life as best as we can. And it has to develop, like I say, it has to develop from the infant stage of crying and screaming, I'm hungry, and I'm abandoned, and I'm learning to trust my caretaker to keep me going, and transferring that attitude onto God and living our life that way. That's what's meant to happen. The opposite of that is to either to say I'm a Greek and what I see is what I get, and there's nothing more. And I see a world in which God is not fair, and God's not God. I don't understand God, and if I don't understand God, then God makes no sense. Which is what a world we live in to such a huge extent, complemented in a negative way by an attitude that I have needs that are pressing me, and I need to satisfy those needs, and hence I have vision and drive and courage to wring out the pleasure that I want to wring out from life, which ultimately becomes my only meaning and my only goal, and it clouds out any higher moral purpose from life. So this is a chilling Torah portion. It is certainly relevant to what's going on in our lives. It's relevant to what we see in the world today. And please God, we should take these lessons to heart, and we should become courageous people living courageous lives in sync with and in tune with the direction that Hashem gives the world.